Hi, it's Des here. I'm in Denver in Colorado. I am at Commvault GO 2019. I have the pleasure of being joined by Ricardo Santos, who's a Senior Product Manager at Commvault for Cloud and Virtualization. Ricardo, thanks for joining me on camera. Great to see you.
You too, thank you, my pleasure.
Now, we were talking earlier about your whole world of containers and Kubernetes, and I have a long list of things I want to ask you, but let's just kick off first for viewers and talk about what are you doing inside Commvault around this whole space of virtualization and cloud, and particularly containers and Kubernetes.
Sure, yeah. So with containerization, that seems to be the, I wouldn't call it the flavor du jour, right?
Right.
So everybody wants to move to be cloud native, and that seems to be the sort of modernization strategy for most enterprises right now. It's, go cloud native, what does that mean? I'm not sure. Do a Google search, first thing that pops up is containers, right? And so we're sort of getting that from our customers, right? And our customers are now starting to play with that. And they're kind of going through this learning curve of, what does it mean when it comes to deploying these cloud native workloads, getting these applications containerized, specifically in containerized platforms, and then how I'm going to deal with compliance issues and checking the tick boxes to make things go production, right? So that's more or less how it kind of organic evolved. We've been doing a lot of work in infrastructure as a service, and of course all the public cloud guys. So this is just simply the next progression, right? We're just trying to keep track with what our customers are asking us for.
And I imagine this is actually something that you ran initially to solve problems for yourselves. You're almost your own first client, because you would have gone through the same digital transformation, if you like, for want of a phrase, as far as Commvault, the organization, goes. So you've gone through refactoring your code to containerize it, Dockerize it, put it into orchestration and automation of the orchestration inside the likes of Kubernetes, and leveraging cloud methodologies and models. So these design principles are things that you've already gone through yourself, so it's a natural evolution that you now make it available to customers, I'm sure.
That's correct. So, at Commvault, we believe that we should eat our own dog food. And
there's no better sales pitch than that.
I know, right? And being a software company, I think we understand a little something about DevOps, right? So there's a lot of lessons that we've learned, some that we actually are getting straight from our customers. So interestingly enough, the DevOps use case when it comes to containerization and going cloud native evolved already. It's relatively new, but it's already evolved into different things. So as Commvault, yes, we're a software company, yes, we're developing, but that also could potentially put us into this dangerous, putting our blinders on into just that use case, just the DevOps use case. And we're seeing other things in that area of containerization as well, right? So one of the things that I can share with you is that a lot of our customers are actually looking to these containerization platforms to run databases. Okay. Traditional, stateful databases. Right?
Day-to-day workloads.
Day-to-day workloads, right? That seems to be the most downloadable Docker images that you get in these containerization platforms. And so you sort of get this buzz around DevOps, and you kind of go, okay, well this doesn't really fit there. So as we start to get a little more into this, we started asking the questions, okay, why are you using this? Why not just have your virtualization solve that need? And so what we've discovered is that a lot of these traditional databases, they're easier to manage, easier to configure, upgrade, because you got that orchestration engine running in there. And they will run better. They will, resource consumption is better when you containerize things. So yes, DevOps gets a lot of buzz, but there's this additional use case here that has emerged that even with us being a software company, we wouldn't necessarily predict if we weren't having those conversations.
There's a natural evolution to this. I mean, cloud first is essentially the default go-to these days. If you look at what happened with Microsoft's Office 365, you can't get it on the CD anymore. You have to download it. You have to sign up online. It is cloud only. And when you run the apps, the data goes backwards and forwards to the clouds, whether it's OneDrive or some other platform. So this is the new normal, right? So I think there's a number of large organizations, whether they're federal government, state governments, or other enterprise spaces, where it's taking them a little bit longer because they've got a lot more baggage to bring versus the startups who are just now they're cloud natives. So I think this is a natural progression that this is a conversation that's happening whether people join it or not, right? That's a given. So I think this is a very timely thing for Commvault to be in, because you've got to be ahead of that curve. You've got to be prepared and ready yourselves as an organization and have that solution there. And I think also the case, as you were saying before, I noted that we used to think about some of these methodologies and design principles for development, but it is the new norm in production as well. And as you said, like there's that phrase where we talk about sort of what used to be physical machines and virtual machines. We used to treat them like pets. We used to hug them and love them and hope they didn't die. Yeah. Now we treat containers like cattle. We spin them up and use them when we want, and we don't want them dying, because we raise cattle, we kill them, we eat them. And that sounds like a scary thing, but that's normal. So I think that this whole thing that you've been doing around not just containers and Kubernetes, but the whole cloud and virtualization space is a natural progression. I think the thing that excites me is you've done it yourselves internally and proven it, so therefore I don't have to believe it, I can just look at what you've done as an organization, and you're ahead of the curve. So as a customer, I now know that you're using it, and when I want to use it, I'm ready and willing. And that must be a eureka moment for some of the conversations you're having with the clients, where they're pleasantly surprised, saying, oh, well, you're already doing it because we want to do that.
Yeah, and I think, so absolutely agree. And I think when it comes to some of these conversations that I have with customers, that in particular to the point that you were making about helping our customers early on in these deployment strategies, I think there's a little bit of this sort of education that we have to go through.
Right.
And we're uniquely positioned to do that, right?
Yeah.
So because yes, we're a software company, but also because it seems like there is these different personas that have emerged, right? So you'll have these production workloads. They may have been running in the public cloud, they may have been running in private cloud. Now you're seeing them shift all over the place. But the DevOps side, that still seems to have been in its own little bubble.
Right.
So things are kind of happening there without necessarily having these compliance rules that because it's at that point it might not necessarily have been production yet. This is just, we're just going through this process.
You get away with a lot more in development and testing and training that you can't get away in, say, production DR, right?
Correct. So for us, we're kind of bringing this wealth of knowledge that we have when it comes to production workloads in the cloud and all that, and just saying, hey, guys, just because it's DevOps doesn't mean you can just treat it like it doesn't matter, right? I mean, especially as a software company, DevOps is production. Right?
It's not just about backing up your source code, it's the entire thing around it, right? Scripts, tools, documentation.
Yeah, and eventually even the test dev process, right? So which is part of DevOps. So.
And there's also some of the, you talked about databases and other things. I'd love to get in some of the other use cases you've been into, because I imagine now we've got these challenges around GDPR and compliance and data locality and regionality. So people are having to not just be able to restore data from a disaster recovery, but restore it for a legal requirement. So there's my production, there's my DR, I don't want to touch them. Can I extract an element or a file or something in my data for a regulatory requirement or a legal requirement or a court case or whatever the case may be? Or even just a sample of the data to say, did we have ransomware 3 months ago?
Right.
Or were we being attacked in our log files? There must be some of those exciting use cases that are just popping up now that you didn't anticipate, but you've already solved the problem for.
Right, exactly. So there's, where does most DevOps is happening right now is in the public cloud.
Right.
So all that comes to play, right?
Exactly.
Where am I running, where am I developing my code, my intellectual property, right? So all those things come to play. And certainly, with Commvault, you also have to take those things into consideration. For us right now, most of the environments that we're seeing are still relatively small. So again, we've got these two use cases. We've got the DevOps use case and those databases that are running in production. Absolutely, for that secondary use case, that totally applies. Right? For the DevOps use case, there's other issues that we also have to consider, which is the data sets tend to be a lot smaller, right? So yes, with those databases, it could be terabytes worth of data, maybe more, but with DevOps, usually it's just small test data sets. But what we find is that because of the self-service aspect of these containerization platforms, right? That's all managed at that orchestration layer. Now all of a sudden you have this additional thing you have to worry about, which is I may only have 10 gigs in this volume, but I got 300 of them. How do I back that up?
That's a lot of data.
Right? How do I back this up? How do I get this containerized application, which is really maybe part of a DevOps process that I'm going through, and apply some backup policies to it, when you will have multiple developers collaborating in this containerized platform.
Right.
So what happens there is that the data itself, the piece that needs a backup and restore treatment is just as important as the metadata that allows us to bring the ownership and you know the
rights,
the
privileges,
the config max, all that stuff attached to, so that when that development team was collaborating and something went wrong, they can get it the way it was, so it's still isolated into that project, right? So it's not just backup and restore, it's a combination of backing up the persistent data and restoring the persistent data, but reinstantiating the pieces that don't require backup. Yeah. They're stateless, right? The configuration, the keystrokes that those end users, those developers took to get to that point where they're ready to do their work, right? That is equally valuable, and that's what we've been focusing on.
Absolutely.
Right.
And you touched on something there that I just wanted to highlight and get your thoughts on, and that is that, you know, when we talk about cloud, you know, there's a perception it's only public cloud, but you know, we're seeing a pervasive rollout of private cloud, as in it's my own infrastructure, but I'm still running cloudy things on it, or I'm using it in cloud format, consuming it as if it's cloud. You know, business units might be doing chargebacks, or I want that agile DevOps orchestration and automation. And multi-cloud, which is a big theme here at Commvault GO 2019, because we're not just consuming one vendor or the other. We don't want cloud lock-in. We might be buying one particular application service here as a SaaS. We might be using a PaaS there. We might be using infrastructure service internally. So imagine that's a big challenge for you now, and that is that people are containerizing and refactoring their code themselves, or they're getting third-party products such as yours, which are containerized and run under automation platforms like Kubernetes. So now they're challenged with multi-cloud. So it's not just the cloud model with the complexity of the segregation of things in the stack, but now it's multiple copies of them on multiple platforms.
Correct, yeah. So with specifically to Kubernetes and a lot of these platforms that are Kubernetes based, right? And let's be honest here, they're basically all Kubernetes based, right?
Right.
I think
it's a predominant platform.
Yeah, you know, that's the
reality of our world.
Right. So I think for us, the sort of the low-hanging fruit is Kubernetes, right? So if we start there, then it kind of opens up all the managed service providers that are offering Kubernetes, and all the public guys now have those, right? So for us, it's going to be, I mean, obviously we're doing all the Commvault things in multi-cloud, that's Commvault.
Yep.
So it's really just, okay, how do I, you know, use APIs, use the native APIs to really, you know, tackle these platforms, Kubernetes, right, behind it, and then do the things that I need to do, grab those important metadata files, but then once I have that, it's small tweaks for us to go from one provider to the next provider, because most of them say, okay, yes, we do allow you to do these, you know, third-party vendor API calls against it. But then once we have that within Commvault, then we can just say, okay, you're on this cloud over here, protecting this environment. Now you're in Commvault, but you want to, you know, move from the development team to the test team. No problem. You know, we're just going to restore over here.
That core functionality carries across multiple providers, either externally or internally, or a hybrid between. And the functionality, as far as the use case goes, it's almost irrelevant in many ways which cloud provider goes to, depending on the use case.
That's the goal.
You might have a lot of data so you want to keep internally, you might be a government agency, you need to keep it internally, or you might want to then even just, you know, I guess use it on the cost point based on spot pricing. Right? You might want to run your web interface here one day and another there, another, the whole range of reasons.
Yeah, we want our customers to be able to go and pick the provider of choice, and then we'll just work with whatever that may be.
I think that's an exciting opportunity for clients to think about with what you're doing around this virtualization space, particularly with the Kubernetes capability, because that whole challenge of vendor lock-in, not that we're any particular vendors, but that is a dangerous place to be no matter where you're at, right?
Yes, and just because it's open source doesn't mean there's no vendor lock-in
exactly,
there,
right? Exactly. And so I think this is going to be a breath of fresh air for many people, particularly our viewers here, where they're like, oh, okay, so now I don't just get locked into a particular platform or a particular vendor or a particular brand, or even a use case where it's on-premises or in the public cloud. with that in mind, and you touched on something interesting there with regard to APIs, because we're really moving into an API economy. I imagine that there's now a situation where people can actually provide third-party plugins and integration into that, so you can talk to other providers. So maybe even if someone's not currently using Commvault platform but wants that functionality, you can effectively stretch out and provide that to them. Next 3 to 5 years, where do you see this going? I'm really curious to sort of say, you've got this capability now, and as Commvault always does, you're ahead of the curve. You've got to be there ready and willing, waiting when the market comes. You can't be in catch-up mode. Next 3 to 5 years, where do you see this going? Because I mean, we know that containerization and virtualization and orchestration and DevOps, et cetera, is the new normal.
Right.
There's no getting away from that. There's just such a number of reasons that makes sense, technically, commercially, and otherwise. Where do you see this going? As far as large enterprise and end users go that you're talking to every day, how do you see them applying this? How do you see them adopting it? And at what point should they be reaching out to you and your team here at Commvault to have a conversation about how you can help them get there?
Sure. So first, because we have gone through some of these things ourselves and we have learned the lessons, it's never too early to reach out, right? We want to have these conversations.
Sooner than later.
This is what I like to talk about, right?
And you can help them avoid pitfalls, right?
Of course.
People try to do it themselves and they learn the hard way.
Yeah.
And fail fast is fine as long as you don't do it too often.
Right, and I think one of the first pitfalls is that, I mean, we're sort of experiencing this right now, which is, all right, you do have this, terrific orchestration engine, you're moving into cloud native, you got this containerization thing, but guess what? You're still with your storage guy over here, and maybe this is not a cloud-aware storage solution, right? So this is one of the first pitfalls that we're seeing. So it seems that in this containerization area, and this is not Commvault specific, but just in the area in general, the shift that I'm kind of observing right now is this, okay, let's let the storage be distributed, but also be container aware and container specific. And the second thing is that, you're similar to OpenStack, we were talking about this earlier, where a lot of the vendors have kind of jumped on board and they decided, okay, well, let's get these plugins to live under OpenStack. That's kind of the same thing for Kubernetes, right? Let's not have storage be a limitation for us, right? So this is sort of like the movement that we're in right now. I think in the future that will be resolved, right? And I think we're well positioned to address some of those storage concerns. But I think that it will shift away from us talking about backup, and it will be more of what other services can you bring into the table here, right? It's not because honestly, containers ought not to need backup.
No.
Right? It's the data that needs backup, right? So I think the conversation is going to shift dramatically. I think it's important that we do still, as I mentioned before, go through that education process, because just because it's DevOps doesn't mean it's not production. It does need that. But I think it's going to be, how can we enhance the platform itself? By platform, I mean the containerization platform. How can we be a part of that, so that your developer, your end user, which really only cares about the application. He doesn't really care about the moving bits and pieces underneath. He just says, I'm working on this application. Don't talk to me about storage. Don't talk to me about all these things. How can we enhance that, right? So this is the stuff we're thinking about right now, right? I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but this is more or less kind of how I'm seeing things develop.
No, I think you covered it really well there, because the evolutionary path we're going through is happening regardless of whether we get on board or not. And you're ahead of this curve by having this capability in place now and already been thinking about it. So I think the thing that I would say to viewers is to reach out today, reach out sooner than later and start that conversation, because when we think about various industries and market sectors, if I'm in banking or wealth management or finance or transport and logistics or aviation, that's my core business. I'm not in the data protection space. I'm not in the ransomware or cyber security space. I want to stay core to my business. So having that conversation with you and your team here at Commvault allows them to sort of remain focused on that and not have to be an IT shop.
Yes.
And finally, I just wanted to So that I think listening to what you're saying there, it brings me back to that core phrase that I'm hearing more and more often, that when people used to think about Commvault as like the backup company, really you're a data protection company.
Yes.
And I think this falls directly into that space now that, as you said, not just DevOps, but production and DR are being containerized and put into Kubernetes, and that's just the new normal. So that data protection in that space around virtualization and cloud and containers, it's just a natural evolution, and I'm really pleased to see you're on top of it.
Well,
and
thank you.
I think it's going to be one of those things where people are going to be coming to you in droves saying, we want to go there, help us get there, but not just in the data protection, show us how you did it.
Yeah.